going to start with CJ Stroud. By the way, Thomas, it can sometimes get lost here, but CJ Stroud is currently, depending upon the sportsbook you look at, about minus 165 to be the first overall pick. Minus 165 for those who are scoring at home is a 62.2 break-even percentage to be the first overall pick, meaning if you want to make that bet, you need to think he's a 63% or better chance to be the first overall pick. That has gone down since the Panthers traded for that first pick. He got all the way up to minus 400, which is an 80% break-even probability. So early on, people thought when they made that trade that they made it for CJ Stroud. Over time, there has been money on the other guys, right? So Bryce Young currently is plus 165. Plus 165, if you're scoring at home, you need a 37.7% chance to bet that. Followed by Anthony Richardson, who is 9-2 to be the first overall pick, and then Will Levis is 40-1. Those are the four guys we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk about them in that order. We're going to start with CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud, Ohio State Buckeyes. And by the way, William James, one of our loyal listeners, minus 150 on FanDuel. So even better if you want to go ahead and make that bet. That's a 60% break even. If you want to, CJ Stroud, second in college football last year in yards per pass attempt, 9.4 per my former employer at PFF. 16 turnover-worthy plays, which is actually in the bottom third of college football. He had an average depth of target of 10.7 yards, adjusted completion percentage about 73. His pressure to sack ratio, which is an important variable we're going to talk about here, 14.1%, which is 41st in college football. And he had roughly 2.9 second time to throw, which was among, top fourth in college football in terms of time to throw in the pocket. So that's kind of the profile when you look at CJ Stroud coming out of Ohio State. We've had a few quarterbacks come out of Ohio State of late, obviously. Dwayne Haskins was one. That of course didn't work out. And the jury is still out on Justin Fields, who currently plays for the Bears, and is the reason why the Panthers are picking here and not the Bears. So, Thomas, when you watch CJ Stroud, from a evaluator's perspective, what came to your mind?
Well, I mean, I watched him throughout the season, of course, and honing in a little bit more, of course, video related and video study wise. Let me just start by saying, to me, his presence has always been something that has caught my attention. Just look, my background, I love athletic people, I love athletic quarterbacks as well. It's not normally my way to think we're going to be looking at a 5'10" quarterback and snapping him off the board at the first overall pick, if that's in fact what happens, with a guy like Young. We'll talk about him, of course, in a moment. When I watch CJ, and I know there was a lot of banter out there and a lot of people at Ohio State and the fan base throwing darts at him because of his lack of running ability, or at least his lack of running. I think it's more that, not the ability. I think this guy's got this really complete package to him that's what struck me, right? I think he has ability to stand tall in the pocket. I think he's got a nice awareness in the pocket. He's got a fluidity and a smoothness about him. I think the way that he delivers, his mechanics, I am all on board with that. I do like his ability to move and adjust. That's a big thing for me, right? I mentioned before with Matt Ryan, his ability to step up, or the struggle to step up when there's pressure in his face, is something that was a concern of mine through all of those years in Atlanta. We had to protect that way. I think it's the same way with a lot of quarterbacks out there. I like CJ Stroud's ability. Now it's a little bit different, right? We always project in college to the NFL. Very different when those guys are in your face, obviously, in the NFL. So I'm still trying to get my feel there, but it feels like he has the awareness and the ability to move around in the pocket appropriately and get rid of the ball at a what is he? He's 2.92 seconds, you said?
Yeah.
Under 3, we like that. So I like that ability. And again, I think this is a guy that you can grow with. And I want to continue to talk about this. I don't want to just spew everything out at the beginning of this. I want you to pepper me with questions. I like the guy. I like what he offers. I think the upside is there. I think teams are going to be very interested. Look, whether he goes first, second, or third will be really interesting. I guess not third, right? We're talking maybe fourth, by fourth.
Well, I think that if he were to fall to 3 for some reason, I think a team's trading with Arizona. Like, I think that that's fairly plain. But
Probably.
yeah,
Yeah.
to your point, like he would not go to the Cardinals for sure. It's a you said upside, which I think is really interesting because I think everybody in this draft cycle that I've heard try to evaluate players pins Stroud as more of like a finished product than the other guys. And I see that in certain ways. I see that in, he's definitive. You watch that Georgia game and, you watch the Georgia game and those are some NFL ball players and he's moving in the pocket in ways he's moving with his eyes downfield. He's doing a lot of NFL things. And Thomas, can you just give me a little bit of an idea of like, how as a scout do you watch those things and say, okay, that's a polished attribute for a player, and not immediately go to this idea that, okay, he has a limited ceiling? Because when I think about like, the last time we had a lot of quarterbacks in the draft, we had, Lawrence, Wilson, Lance, Fields, and then we had Mac Jones. And I think a lot of people looked at Mac Jones and said, boy, that's a guy who can kind of step into an offense right away and do some things. Limited ceiling, though. And I think that's more or less right. But those aren't always the case, right? A guy can come out of college incredibly polished and still have a high ceiling. You think about a guy like Andrew Luck or somebody like that. So when you're scouting and you see some polish, how do you then kind of divorce yourself from then saying, but yeah, he can still have upside? How do you still project his upside when he's answered some of the crucial questions that need to be answered about whether the guy can play quarterback in the NFL?
So I find this interesting from your perspective here, because someone is polished. You're saying maybe in the analytic world, or at least what you've read, that there's limited upside because he's already where he is. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think a lot of people believe that, right? So it's one of the reasons why, age is such an important variable in models, because people believe that, as you get older, you're kind of taking some tools out of the toolbox, right? And you're already kind of using things. And so when you get in the NFL and they're bigger, faster, stronger, if you've already used a lot of the tools of the trade, then where can you draw to get better? And that's why people always love, and we're going to talk about Anthony Richardson, a guy who is trying to get by without any real NFL caliber, attributes yet, because then they feel like, well, once we can apply those, then the sky's the limit. If you're a guy like Stroud and you're saying, well, he's accurate in the pocket, he doesn't, like 14.1 sack to pressure is not that bad. It's not great. But you're already doing a lot of things that NFL quarterbacks do. Is there that much juice left to squeeze out of the orange? I think that's what a lot of people believe. And I think it's false. I think if a guy shows that kind of poise and stuff in the college game, he can still process things faster. He can still, be more physical. Like we talked about this on the show, like he can avoid injuries better. Like we talk about how Brady avoided injuries for so long. It's because he can use half his brain, that he is like where everything's on autopilot because he's so good at the game. He can use half of his brain to take hits better and avoid injuries. Like there's so many more ways to improve. And I think that with Stroud, a lot of people see him being polished and say that's a low ceiling quarterback.
So I would say I've been around a situation in New England with Tom Brady in those early years where there was, of course, upside. He came in with an element of polish. Obviously didn't play as much, and et cetera, et cetera. I can use Matt Ryan as another example of a guy who had a lot together. I don't look at guys who have polish and who are accomplished in all areas as having limited upside. I've never looked at it that way. I get the concept. For me, it's you bring him in a situation where you're not spending your world's time trying to develop A, B, C, X, Y, and Z within his game, so he's able to develop even quicker in the National Football League. That's something, and again, we can go on and on about this, but that is something that has been on my mind as I've evaluated football players, quarterbacks especially throughout my career, is when you see a guy down there, and maybe it is Anthony Richardson, where people are saying he's got so much to build on, there's so much upside, But what truly is that? Okay, because of athleticism, because of strength, and what's he had one of the best. I think what was his? You had quoted here in some of your data.
Yeah, I mean, yards per attempt. I mean, he was one of the most productive players in all of college football.
Right.
He was 29th in ADOT, which again, you're going down the football field. Down the field. Like when you looked at him from an arm strength perspective, Thomas, like there's no problems there, right? Like he can make all the throws. Which is important as well. Like we had a really good question here from Simon Shee, who said, how do you quantify and measure polished in an analytical sense?
Good question.
It shouldn't be based on a production or projection, right? I mean, when I look at polished, and this is something, I'm gonna say something negative about him more to talk about his polish. So, when Stroud was clean, meaning like there was no pressure on him, he averaged 10.3 yards per pass attempt, which was twice as much as when he was pressured, 5.7. Meaning, like when I think of that as kind of like this is a guy when all the business was taken care of. He's an assassin, right? He's an assassin. Mm-hmm. He's got that stuff down. And pressures is something that's hard because it comes in all shapes and sizes. So when you look at quarterback production when pressured, it can often be noisy because pressure can come as a product of four-man, pressure, and then you got good coverage behind you. That's bad. Or it can come because of a blitz. And oftentimes, if you can beat that pressure, you're going to win because your guy's got one-on-one coverage or whatever. It can come or pressure, like if it's a guy like Mahomes who can escape, then the defense is screwed. And so when I look at more polished kind of quarterback play, I more mean like when the table is set for this quarterback, what kind of guy is he? And when I look at Stroud, when the table is set for him, that means clean pocket. He's completing balls. He's uber productive, and there isn't a Anthony Richardson overshoots the guy by 5 yards element to his game. Like you don't want that, right? If you're an offensive coordinator, you're a general manager, a team builder, and you say, I'm going to go out and spend $40 million on my offensive line just for the guy to airmail receivers when you protect him. You don't want that, right? And so when I think of Stroud, I think this is a guy for which that won't happen. That's going to be a guy that if you could set the table for him, good things are going to happen in the NFL.
Now, before we move on, do you think his ability to move, even though there were some complaints about it, do you think that factors in well with his versatility? Because it's a versatility for a quarterback in today's game. I mentioned this before. Loved Matt Ryan, but towards the end of my career there, I started thinking, wow, how would it be to get that athletic quarterback? And today we've seen some really big, tall quarterbacks who are still very athletic, of course, which is an interesting thing. When you talk about movement, athleticism, ability to run, ability to escape, like CJ Stroud might have, I don't know where you gauge him on that. Do you think that adds to polish as a quarterback?
Yeah, there's a phrase called absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence, right? So like, there's a part where, when you think about his two tackles when he was at Ohio State, had like the two biggest wingspans in the entire country. The wide receivers that he has, when he was last year, he had Jackson Smith-Njigba, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, who was the NFL's Rookie of the Year. Then this year, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. He has great players. And so at part of me is going to think, okay, well, if you take away those great players, what happens? Like that's, I think, a legitimate question about CJ Stroud because you don't have that. But on the other side, it creates the absence of necessity for him. I personally, when I watch him, I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to run the read option and keep it. Like, I don't think he's going to be a guy like that. But I also don't think he's going to kill you because he can't avoid a rush. Like, it's very clear that he can move around in the pocket. And because his offensive line was so stout at Ohio State at times, he didn't have to. And so to me, it's more of like I'm going to leave open the idea that he's more than athletic enough to be an NFL quarterback and be a good one.
Look, he's going to be, we know he's going in the top 3 or whatever. Okay. So my feeling is I'm not that worried about not having the right people around him. I think a guy like this who shows as he does, back to your polish comment, back to the ability to have versatility, back to standing tall, back to being a smart guy and having a presence about him. Of course, leadership is very important. I think these are the kind of things that make those top three teams say, look, if I don't get who I want, and maybe that's someone out there who truly wants, Young to be their quarterback, then we're going to be good here, right? Look, before we move on, I think it's really important when you're sitting there and you start deciding, man, I am pulling someone off the board that is going to be the tone setter for our organization, hopefully for the next few years. Or as a general manager, I'm pissing down my leg and there's going to be a lot of darts thrown my way. That's the way it is, right? There's a lot of pressure in this situation. We know it at so many levels. When you have someone like this who has so much to offer out the gate, even though it may not be the sort of ostensible upside that some people are thinking with some of the other players, whether it's Anthony Richardson or not, it is a good settling feeling as a general manager, knowing you're coming in with this. You compare this to what they did with San Francisco a few years ago, right? How many years ago has it been?
Since 2 years ago, 2021.
I mean, think about how uneasy a pulling off the board that was. This has an element, not of ease, but an element of we've done our work and we feel comfortable. We're going to grow. There's nothing kind of off the cuff. We're not taking a chance. We're pulling this together and we think that we can build with this guy. And personally, I think there is upside here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it feels safe, for Stroud. Sure. For better or worse, it feels safe, which you think about Frank Reich, after years of sort of the issues with, obviously Andrew Luck's retirement, then Brissett, then Rivers, then Wentz and Ryan, you maybe want to take less of a gamble, and maybe Stroud ends up being that player.